Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Healthy Empath podcast. I am joined today with Dr. Eva Detko. She has a whole lot of certifications. She's got PhD in physiology, biochemistry, nutritional sciences, and then a whole list of other stuff that perhaps she can touch on. But she's been studying natural medicine and the human mind for 22 years, and she's been through her own health journey. The reason really I resonated with and wanted to talk because just listening to her, I could feel the truth. I could feel that this is someone who's genuinely been on their healing journey and helps people in a very healthy and holistic manner that takes in a wide variety of approaches and just considering a lot of different aspects. So that's really why I wanted to talk to her, and I could just get that feeling that this was a person. I mentioned that a lot with the guests. I could just kind of tell oh, this person has been through it really, and that's the sense I get from her. So I'm excited to share her with all of you today. So with that being said, welcome.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for this introduction. Yeah, I'm glad you're picking up on those vibes. Yeah, there's definitely resonance there. So yeah, excited to be here and share what I can to empower people.
Good. Yeah, and you can touch on it if you want to add to your bio and that kind of stuff. Feel free. But and I know you host, summits and workshops and courses and work with clients. So there, you can find out more about that over at her website, which she'll share. But so can you get us a little started with your health journey and kind of what you went through and what started it all and how you came to approach health the way you do now?
Yeah, it's just like we were saying, but just before we started, indeed, intergenerational trauma and birth trauma were actually big pieces for me in my healing. And as people may or may not know, neurologically and epigenetically speaking, when you have trauma and exposure to stress early in your life, it then makes you sort of more susceptible to subsequent trauma. So when my mother was pregnant with me, it was around three months into the pregnancy, her younger sister died. Her younger sister died as a result of a vaccine injury. This was back in the early 70s. And as people may now know, because there's a lot of evidence coming out, my mother's sister was not the only one who died as a result of the polio vaccine that was around at the time. But obviously, each and every case was a tragedy for each of those families. And basically what that meant was my mother went almost slightly, she just couldn't cope at all with that. She had, and at the time, let's just, this is early 70s, right? So there was no psychotherapy or neuroscience-based techniques that I use now with my clients. None of this existed. And people really were expected to, just deal with trauma. It wasn't even called trauma at that time. There was no such thing as any kind of talk about it either. So people just got on with it. But my mother had her own trauma unresolved from her childhood. So she was already, and she's an empath. So she was already more susceptible, more vulnerable. So when that happened, when her sister died, it just hit her like a ton of bricks. And actually, she went a little like almost loopy over it, and she wanted to dig my aunt up to make sure she's really dead. I mean, really kind of complete denial at the beginning. And then obviously the grief hit her, and she was pregnant with twins. And what was interesting to me, and I still think it's incredibly interesting, that she developed toxemia of pregnancy, and the other baby died in the womb, and she was carrying that baby for like a few weeks before the birth. So she couldn't breastfeed me because what was coming out of her breast was like green fluid. It's like, well, like totally toxic. So there was no way that I was able to have any of that. And not to mention that the birth was traumatic because I breached and I started coming out with like my arm first, and they had to push me back in. And it was just like really, really a lot of craziness and a lot of trauma and drama. And her consultant, when, they were in fact, they were at some point having a debate, which she could hear because they were in the corridor, and like, should we save the mother or should we save the baby? Because I don't think we can save them both. And then they had this argument who to save, and they was like, well, the baby won't survive without the mother, and the mother can still have more babies and all of that. So they were actually considering like completely not saving me at all, right? I'm glad they changed their mind. But so she was obviously going through the traumatic process of birth and still like having that going on like next to her, and being completely dependent on the decision that those people were going to make. But basically the consultant actually said to her that without a doubt, to in his mind, that the outcome of it and how it all kind of played out in the end, and the outcome and what happened with her pregnancy and the fact that the other baby didn't make it was because of the trauma that she'd gone through with her sister dying. So even then, even though there was no trauma informed anything, there were no techniques, modalities that people could go to. The only thing they had it at the time, because Poland is a very religious country, so people would just go to church and they would pray, and that would be the thing that some people still do that and still have, and that's the way of dealing with it, spirituality. And that's the only thing that those people had at the time, really. But it's interesting that that doctor at the time actually did connect the dots. That's very interesting to me. But I didn't actually know that had happened until later in life. So then here I am coming into this environment where everybody is very strange emotionally, and I'm sure people who are a little bit more sensitive to emotions and to energy understand, where you have this kind of onslaught of like, on the one hand, it's almost like it can make you a bit almost schizophrenic. On the one hand, it's like that extreme joy and happiness, right? Because there's a new baby and she's going to fill the hole after my aunt just died a few months earlier. And then at the same time, there is this extreme sadness, grief, and guilt to do with what happened. So it was just sort of like emotionally, I think, and energetically, obviously, even though I don't remember it, but it was a very clearly confusing time. And so to my nervous system, it was just a complete overwhelm. My grandmother was, I was healing her and she was healing me. And I will always be grateful that I had that, because if I hadn't had my grandmother's, fussing over me and this like extreme like love and outpouring of love, then I probably would have suffered even worse consequences of that birth trauma and that intergenerational trauma. But at least I was healed a little bit by my grandmother. But then, like I said, all of that, it primes the nervous system and the brain for more trauma when you go through something like that so early. And then I was bullied at school. I suffered abuse and various other things. And then as a teenager, I was actually suicidal for a while. I just struggled emotionally a lot, and kind of almost into my kind of late teens. And it was only at that point where I really thought, I can't live like this. I just like literally cannot live like this. If that's what the rest of my life is like, then I may as well end it now, because there's just no way I'm gonna go through God knows how many decades of this, right? But I knew there was always something in me that made me move forward and look for answers. And I knew at some level that I was going to find those answers and I was going to heal, but it was quite a sort of bumpy ride. I mean, I was bullied really badly at school for 4 years of absolute torture. So that kind of ongoing repetitive trauma, I mean, that really just completely almost destroyed my identity and it completely destroyed my self-worth, obviously. And I had to kind of rebuild it from scratch, if that makes sense. And of course, when you have so much going on, then it's only a matter of time when it starts breaking your body down, because you've got the trauma. First, you've got, this kind of, and you've got this energetic onslaught, but it goes into your mental body, and then it eventually goes into your physical body, right? So sooner or later, when you have unresolved trauma, it starts breaking your body down. And so I then became more susceptible to all sorts of things, and I ended up with chronic fatigue, and I have fibromyalgia and thyroid issues and this and that and gut issues and you name it. And so kind of had to rebuild it all from scratch, if you like. But it's a journey. That's why we're here, isn't it? I mean, that we're here to experience. So I certainly can say that I've experienced stuff, and I've now, I've turned it around. I mean, it's something that you look back on and go, okay, right, it was a gift. It was meant to bring me where I am here right now in this moment. And in this now moment, it's brilliant, and I'm loving life and I'm enjoying every minute. So clearly, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for all those experiences. So it's in that way, it is all good, but it's just been an interesting journey.
Sounds like it. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Lots of chills at different points, and just feeling it myself. So you started to answer some of the questions I was going to ask, but so throughout that timeline, one thing I was going to ask, is like how the body started to be affected by those, since that early trauma and how that was manifested. And for those interested more on birth trauma, I think that was episode 2 or 3. We went into that and explained the importance and the significance of that. So, at what age did your body start to like break down? Like you mentioned, like the fatigue and this and that, and then when you were healing it, then did you start to make the connections that it was related to those things, or did you just start like nutritionally and thinking it was that? Like how did that process start to begin when you started building, basically growing a new body?
My gut issue started in my 20s, in my early 20s. It's actually, if I really properly think about it, then it started with severe gut dysfunction that I was just chasing my tail about. And initially, I knew that gluten wasn't going to do me any good, because I actually already was quite interested in nutrition at that time. So obviously everybody does that, don't they? First, the thing that they go to is quite a natural thing. Well, not everybody, but most people will think, well, how can I manipulate my food to make myself healthier? So I did that with the gut stuff, and that definitely helped with the gut issues. But when I went to develop chronic fatigue, at that point, I'd already had quite a good diet. So further tweaking my diet was not going to get me out of chronic fatigue. And I knew that pretty much from the beginning. Well, not from the very, very beginning, because I actually had a viral infection, and I was told that post-viral fatigue is normal, and to expect it to be there for a few weeks. So not at the very, very beginning, but 3 months later, like, hello, come on, it's just not normal, right? So then eventually they actually did diagnose me with chronic fatigue syndrome. And at that point, I knew that there's a lot more to my healing at that point than diet, and I couldn't achieve it with diet alone. I knew that. And so it was interesting because at that point I started migrating towards things like hypnotherapy, acupuncture, so energy medicine, reflexology, things like that. And I started seeing different people. And it was interesting to me that they were all saying the same things to me. And they all said, listen, I mean, you stressed out of your head. I mean, just seriously, you're completely neurotic, which I was at the time, very reactive and all of that sort of stuff. But it was interesting to me that those people were saying similar things to me, even though they had nothing to do with each other. And I was thinking, yeah, I better take notice of that, because initially you go like, no. Because when you admit that you have unresolved trauma and you have emotional toxicity and you have those unresolved issues that you need to face and you don't know how to do it, you tend to be in denial about it and think that, no, it's probably something else. But when I heard it like 2 or 3 times from different people, I thought that sort of got me thinking. And so yeah, and then that point, that changed everything. When I did that work, it literally, I never looked back. And this is why I then went to study it, and I will be studying this for the rest of my life, because there's always more to learn on the, whether it's consciousness or neurology, neuroscience, whatever, there's always more to learn, isn't there? So but that is really how it started for me to really get into how all this connects together and how those things affect each other, and everything in the body affects everything else. It's no, mind and body are not 2 separate things, like the Rockefeller people are trying to tell you. Yeah. So everything affects everything else. I learned that at that point, and I've lived by that. And it's served me very, very well.
Yeah. And so if someone comes to you with gut health issues, do you start nutritionally and then work on emotional stuff, or do you just like go straight in? Or like, how do you approach that with people? And then can you also give perhaps a description of how that works or how that manifests? How can these, stress and, emotions and trauma affect gut health?
Well, when I recently did an entire event on the vagus nerve. So obviously trauma clearly, like I said, it affects different layers of the human being, including the biofield, but it also clearly affects the neurology, affects the brain, and it affects the bodily tissues. But the gut connection really to all this, the emotional toxicity that I'm talking about, when I talk about emotional toxicity, I don't just talk about trauma. I'm talking about social engineering and all the belief systems and all that, the crap, the emotional conflict that people end up with as a result of early social engineering. And obviously trauma, not just PTSD, one-off type traumas, but also developmental and attachment trauma. It's actually the most common type of trauma, to be honest, and it's extremely prevalent. And it's often, developmental trauma is often what wasn't present, not what did happen, but also already about what didn't happen. So the child's emotional needs were not met properly. That's really why it's such an elusive thing for people to kind of come to grips with, because it's about what didn't happen rather than what did happen. And a lot of developmental trauma is about that. Obviously neglect also counts towards that, but most of the time
it's about now. A lot of parents like, oh, you had it so rough as a kid, oh, what happened to you, right? They always think of like, that kind of stuff without thinking of like, well, okay, well, what wasn't met, for the child. And I think just because they fed you and clothed you and didn't beat you too much, that you have nothing to ever complain about.
Exactly. And as we said, this starts to affect the gut from the word go, because there are studies that show that the epigenetic expression of even the bugs inside your gut is affected by early exposure to stress. And that early exposure to stress doesn't need to be abuse. It doesn't need to be neglect. It could simply be to do with the fact that you're a sensitive child and you need more cuddles and you're not getting them when you want them. Yeah, simply that could be enough to traumatize a child, and often is. So then that already has an impact on the gut at that point. So most gut issues, 100%, I mean, there will be always exceptions, but most gut issues really are linked to early trauma. And this is happening, like I said, because of the epigenetic impact on the microbiome, but it's also because of what the early exposure to stress does to our nervous system. And so it basically activates the nervous system, and you end up literally living in fight or flight or freeze. And so what that means is that over time, if you have this sympathetic dominance, or what we call dorsal dominance with the freeze response, then what that means is the rest, digest, and detoxify and heal, which is the other side of the vagus nerve, it's the ventral vagus, it's not going to activate, it's going to become weaker and weaker and weaker. And the vagus nerve is part of the gut-brain axis. So you asked me, how would I approach somebody with gut issues? I mean, obviously, if they're eating at this point, ton of inflammatory stuff and ton of gluten, it's like, get the garbage out straight away. But the number one important thing to do is to immediately stop calming down the vagus nerve and start calming down the gut-brain axis. And that's the vagus nerve is a big part of that. It's the biggest part of that, actually. So that would be my approach, because if you look at even cases of SIBO, for instance, it was like 70 to 80% of SIBO cases will have vagus nerve dysfunction at their cause. It's nothing to do with anything other than the vagus nerve messing up the migrating motor complex. So you can change your diet or take antimicrobials to the nth degree or take probiotics to the nth degree. You're still not going to be able to heal it. And that's why there are people who have been on this journey of trying to heal their gut for years or decades, and they still keep circling around to the same thing. And they tried every diet and they've tried every supplement under the sun, and they're still not where they want to be. I can then guarantee you 100% that if that's what you've experienced, then 100% it's the messed up vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve is messed up because of early exposure to stress, and also the emotional toxicity that results from early trauma and early conditioning. Because when somebody has early trauma and early exposure to stress, and then they're basically bombarded with all sorts of crappy programming, right? When they get to the age of 10, 15, 20, and so on, they will have a really screwy belief systems. Their self-worth will be really poor. They will have chronic guilt, chronic shame, chronic anxiety, chronic fears, chronic this and chronic that. And that is basically the emotional toxicity I'm talking about. So even if somebody may not necessarily feel that they stressed out on a day-to-day basis, if they have poor self-worth, or if they feel overwhelmed, or if they have negative self-talk, or if they have chronic emotional states like what I've just named, then that's emotionally toxic. And the problem is that people desensitize to that. And often people will tell me, well, that's how I've always been. Well, no, that's not how you've always been. You haven't always been anxious, and you haven't always been angry, and you haven't always been guilty, like when you're a baby, you're not any of that, right? So it's you're born a confident human being. It's just that the life then beats it out of you, and then you make all of those adaptations, because all of the attachment styles, even personality styles and all of that, these are adaptations to what we experience in our early lives. Not to mention, we build a belief system around what happens to us in the first few years of our lives. And then we live by that belief system for the rest of our lives if we don't stop and think about it and then choose to change it. So all of that collectively is this emotional toxicity that even if you eat the best diet in the world, and it's still going to affect your gut, because the vagus nerve is the longest nerve of the autonomic nervous system that connects to pretty much every organ in your chest and abdominal cavity, including obviously all of the organs of the digestive system that we have. So all that, whether it is to do with release of enzymes, or whether it's to do with digesting stuff like stomach, for instance. So vagus nerve connects to your stomach, to your pancreas, to your small intestine, 2/3 of the large intestine, and obviously also other organs, your heart, your lungs, your liver, your gallbladder, and also the thymus and spleen, which is part of your immune system. And what messes up the vagus function is that early exposure to stress. So that's really important to understand, is that sometimes you get an infection of your gut because you go abroad and you pick up some exotic bug. Fine. And if you then take some antimicrobials and you over that, then okay. But most of the time when people are talking about gut issues, we're talking about chronic gut issues, yes? Whereby, you have irregularity in terms of your bowel movement, or you get bloating, you get all of those nasty symptoms. You're not able to digest your food properly, then that messes up your microbiome. And it kind of goes back and forth, because one thing gets messed up and then it kind of gets on the loop, and gets on the loop. And then the brain, and then you've got your neurotransmitters. And then if you're not producing those in your gut, like serotonin, then you're going to have symptoms of depression. That goes to the brain. Then the brain tells the body to be more depressed, blah, blah, blah. And that just kind of winds itself up, But all that communication, the main part of that communication between the brain and the gut is your vagus nerve, right? So that is how I approach it. I make sure that you improve your vagus function health, because if you don't do that, then no matter how healthy you diet and how many supplements you take, those supplements cannot work very well, because they need to be broken down, they need to be assimilated. If your vagus function is not right, you're not going to be breaking down food properly, you're not going to be absorbing food properly, and that includes supplements, any supplements that you take, So what then happens is, when we work on vagus nerve function with people, then they find that all those supplements that they've been taking, that they've been kind of like working like half, and suddenly they really feel a boost from them, because suddenly everything is working so much better. So that is my approach, and that seems to be where a lot of people are missing the mark, I have to say.
Right. I like the comparison, or just like this symbolism there, right? When you have problems digesting food, right? You're not processing food, digesting food, and then you're talking about this, relatedness to trauma and early childhood, adverse experiences and trauma. And then so when you're like eating food, you're not digesting that, just like you didn't process and digest your life and your experiences when you were younger. It's like now food, a lot of times food represents life, like sustaining life at least. So it's like you're not able to process and digest life, essentially, is what it all comes down to. So the more you start to just process your life, going back from however far you need to go back, and then working your way up, and just feeling your feelings and allowing those to process, then that makes sense how things will start to like come online, and you'll start to digest food, because there won't be so much just stuck energy and just bogged down and heavy. So Do you now, or do other people you have worked with, do they start to like, go back to eat some, maybe not like a bunch of like processed foods and junk foods, but kind of like for me, like I eat gluten, whereas there was a decent period of time where I didn't, and I did a lot of like gut healing stuff. And now I don't notice any problems with it, as long as, like, of course it depends how much you eat. So have you had any experiences like that, or people that you've worked with who are now able to eat foods that that used to give them problems?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Loads. However, I don't myself advocate rubbish or food that is not clean, because that affects us in every way, biochemically, energetically, emotionally. It affects us in every way. So if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. I mean, it obviously doesn't make sense. So I don't advocate that. But in terms of, let's just stick with an example of somebody who has so much imbalance in their body that they're basically not able to tolerate a proper, like, normal range of food. And I'm talking like things like vegetables and things that they technically should be able to tolerate, although obviously we are all different. And just because broccoli is good for most people doesn't mean it's good for everybody. The same with everything, the same with garlic, the same with everything. So if you don't tolerate particular food, well, maybe it's not good for you or whatever. But there are people, I'm sure you know and you've heard, and that basically their body starts to malfunction through all these imbalances so much that they start to tolerate less and less and less, and they can't do this and they can't do that, they can't eat this, they can't eat that, they can't smell this thing and that thing, and they become this hypersensitive to everything. So that is definitely a nervous system issue, And so then, and obviously don't forget, there's a direct connection between nervous system function and immune function. So if you have reactions to food, that's an immune response. That immune response is absolutely 100% unequivocally connected to your nervous system function, because the relationship between those two systems is so intimate, so close. And like I said, the vagus nerve innervates the gut, the spleen, the thymus. These are all immune organs, right? So when we have that situation where somebody corrects those imbalances within the nervous system, which they can do, because they can do deep breathing, they can do all of those things that we can do, clear the emotional toxicity. There are so many different things that we can do to kind of calm everything down. Then everything in the body calms down, and the immune reactivity is not the same. So the inflammation, chronic inflammation is one of the hallmarks, key symptoms of vagus nerve dysfunction. Anybody who has chronic inflammation in whatever part of the body of any kind that they're struggling to get rid of, it's a vagus nerve issue. So if we can correct that, you find that the whole body calms down, everything calms down, and then the body is a lot more tolerant. It's more tolerant to foods, it's more tolerant to smells, it's more tolerant to even toxins that are coming at it. Because, yeah, sure, we don't want toxins coming at our body, but unfortunately, so far, this is the world we're living in, and we have them everywhere because our horrible people in our governments are allowing the toxins to be sprayed at us, to be put in our food chain, to be put in our water. They're allowing that, right? And so those lobbyists and people who make money out of it don't really give a crap about our health. Let's be clear on that, yeah? So when people trust the governments with their health, you couldn't make a bigger mistake. They don't care. So unfortunately, we will have that onslaught of toxins. And when people are really sensitive, they basically fall apart because they just cannot handle that. So whether it's food or toxins or anything else, and suddenly when you do this work and everything calms down, suddenly you're not on your knees just because you've been exposed to some fumes at a petrol station and that basically knocked you out for the rest of the day. It just doesn't happen. There's more tolerance, there's more margin in the system, there's more bandwidth, if that makes sense, in the system. So that's 100% correct. And then I'll give you an example of a client of mine. I had loads of those cases, but this was so sweet because she had got issues for about over 10 years when she approached me, over 10 years. And at some point, like back and forth, she went to the best clinics. She went to Mark Hyman, the best functional clinic in America, whatever, right? She did all that, spent a lot of money, thousands and thousands of dollars. But then she came across this book from, people may be aware of, The Body Keeps the Score, by Bessel van der Kolk. And she read that book and she thought, aha, this is the missing link, right? So she figured that bit out, and then she approached me to help her clear some stuff and do some work with her. Literally within, I'm kidding you not, within 3 or 4 weeks of the work we were doing together, she went from literally not being able to, like, she was eating like, I don't know, 10 foods because she was like literally reacting to everything. She had been taking a ton of supplements and not even being able to tolerate herbs, like, you know, herbs that are supposed to calm and soothe your digestive system. She wasn't even able to tolerate that, right? And within a very short time, a few weeks, I think it was literally like a month, maybe even less than that, she started saying, this is amazing because now I have something to reintroduce some things and I'm okay, I can do this. And then another couple of weeks of work, and it was her birthday. And she was so excited and she emailed me and she said that, I know this was a bit crazy, but I really wanted this. And I had, I think she had something like pumpkin pie or key lime pie or something like that, but it was with gluten and it was with dairy, 2 things that would just literally knock her out for like a week usually. And she had that slice of pie for her birthday, just like an experiment, and basically she wanted to, because she hadn't been, you know, able to eat probably, you know, anything nice for so long. And so she treated herself and she was fine. And so obviously I said, you know, don't go nuts and then start eating lots of gluten and dairy, because obviously there's issues with that. It's not going to do, it's inflammatory and it's not going to do you very good if you overdo it, right? But the whole point was that normally that would have really knocked her out for a long time. She, like, her digestion would have been off for like a week or more in that situation, and it didn't do that. So that is what is possible.
Wow, yeah, it's beautiful. I'm getting chills, and yeah, it's so. How is your perspective of health changed, Raul? Like, how do you see what? Well, actually, let's go with that. Yeah, what is your definition of health now? Because yeah, I really like that. I see that all the time. People get so caught up in like just this trap, this narrow lens, right? Just trying to go deeper and deeper, restrict more foods, or maybe no, I just need this combo, or if, you know, I had taken those supplements, and then just deeper in there instead of kind of broadening back. So, what is your? How do you see health in general? You know, what is health? Because obviously, it's not just not getting a disease or something, and so yeah. And then
I love this question. You're right.
Yeah.
Optimal health is a lot more than the absence of disease. Okay, I think everybody's on the same page with that.
And then can you like explain what that looks like? Because a lot of people just don't even know what that looks like at all. Or it actually even kind of reminds me, we were talking earlier about the people not recognizing that they are anxious, or that they are like in this kind of overactive state, because they look around at their life now and like, well, I see a steady income, I see a family, I see loved ones, like I'm not in danger, so therefore I don't have I can't have anxiety or depression or trauma or all this stuff, because like look around me, because they don't go in and realize what's happening in their body. So yeah, what is your definition of health, and then can you like describe that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So my definition of health is that we are not like different parts, it's all connected. The field, the mind, and the body are one system. That's the foundation of everything. Because if you get on board with that idea, rather than try and separate and treat mind stuff separately and body stuff separately and then energetic stuff, it's like, no, forget it. It's all one system, okay? And if you get on board with that, then what you then need to understand is this, that you've got your biochemical self, the physical biochemical, right? Then you've got the emotional stuff, the emotional body. And then you've got your biofield, you've got your energy field. Now, you can have disturbances at any point coming at you that will affect any of those three pillars, if you like, those columns, right? And then what also happens is that everything affects everything else. So an example of that was that if I have a negative emotion and it's chronic, because normally emotion come and go, it's absolutely fine, no problem with that. But I'm talking chronically. I'm stuck in something chronically. One, it's going to mess me up energetically, clearly. And then secondly, like we already said, it will actually go deeper and affect the body, because it will then mess up the gut and and then it will wind itself up. And so everything affects everything else. So we obviously need to accept that. But what then happens is that when we have those different external stimuli coming at us, none of this is good or bad, really, because it's all down to the internal interpretation at the end of the day. So all stress is really internal stress. There's no such thing as external stress, because we know that people could be going through exact same experience, and one person will come away traumatized and the other one won't. And there's loads of different factors which obviously affect that and determine whether that's what happens. So really, it's all created internally, right? And when you have those layers, the field and the emotional and then the physical, when you have this, for instance, trauma that is infiltrating those layers and then eventually makes it to the physical body, once you have a dysfunction at a physical level, you can't just do energetic work. You have to support the body physically as well. I mean, you can, but you're going to be a lot more effective and efficient doing this if you recognize that you already have, I don't know, gastritis, and your stomach is not working, or you have low stomach acid, or you have a vitamin deficiency or something like that. That's a biochemical thing. And if you already have a dysfunction at the biochemical level, you need to correct the dysfunction at the biochemical level. As well as that, you also need to be addressing what actually was the root cause, how that dysfunction got there in the first place. So this is basically how I work to create optimal health, and how I view optimal health, that we need to recognize those different levels. And we also recognize not to, as you said exactly, not to be blinkered and try and biohack everything, because it doesn't work like that. If you want optimal health, then you need to make a commitment to your health. You need to live it and breathe it. So if you have destructive thoughts, nobody's yet created good health with crappy, toxic mind. That just doesn't happen. But at the same time, look at people who haven't got any, somebody asked me, can you have this, emotional toxicity and have good health? And the answer is no, you can't. Can you have holes in your energy field and be healthy? No, you can't. So you need to think of that. Can you have disrupted microbiome and be healthy? No, you can't. So all of those levels are important, but there is obviously a chain of events. There is this domino effect, and we're not always aware of it as it's happening, because disease takes decades to develop. Cancer doesn't take a week to develop, it takes decades to develop. The same with autoimmune disease. So this is why sometimes people just go, I think I'm okay. I mean, they're running like a headless chicken between the jobs and picking up shit. I mean, it's just not a judgment. It's the life that it's a crazy world that we're living in. But they have all of these things going on, and they've desensitized so much, because that's what they've done for years, that they don't actually recognize just how stressed they are. And because they don't recognize it, they allow it to continue, and then that seeps through deeper and deeper and deeper until it affects the physical. And when it starts affecting the physical, you have to correct the physical as well as the emotional, as well as the energetic. So that's really how I work to create optimal health and how I view health. Because if you just single something out, you are unlikely to have big, amazing results. It will get you some of the way, obviously, it will have some effect, but you may not get the effect that you thought you could have just by singling something out and just be blinkered and just think, I'm just gonna go after my gut now and just like, take this like the most expensive probiotic on the market or something, and or whatever other supplement, and I'll just address this bug that may be messing with my microbiome. And it just, as you said, you sort of going narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower, and then you start to forget the big picture altogether. It's easy to do because a lot of people in the space, in this health space, will lead you down those rabbit holes. They will, because they choose to specialize in those very narrow fields. And so when you're not quite sure what you're dealing with, it's very easy to just go like, oh, maybe it's that. And then before you know it, you've been down this, like really something just really so small and really so specific. And you've completely blanked out the fact that how does that fit in with everything else that is going on for you? And very few people look at it really comprehensively and really holistically. Really holistically means to look at all the layers, the emotional, the psychoenergetic, the energetic, and the physical, right? And you asked, how do people even know? This is a very good question, because a lot of people live with a lot of things that are not right. If somebody doesn't go to the toilet, and empty their bowels at least once a day, it really should be twice a day. That's not normal. If their bowel movement is really hard and they have to sit on the toilet for 10 minutes or 15 minutes, that's not normal. If you have like, maybe belching or something like that all the time, that's not normal. But people just sort of start to, or you have headaches, or you have fatigue and you have to have 5 cups of coffee through a day to even keep yourself going. That's not normal. That's not how it should be. But I think you, Mike, said very, very correctly that people just think those things are normal when they're not normal. That's not. And so then what happens is, because you're ignoring those early signs, those are all early signs that your body is not happy. These are early signs that your body is not getting what it needs. It always starts with those early signs. But because we're so good at ignoring them in the Western world, in the West particularly, this is not a global issue, it's a Western issue really. And we're so good at disconnecting from our bodies and just living inside our heads, and so good at ignoring what the body is really trying to very gently communicate at first, and then you ignore it and the body will start going, hello, right? So you're going to start throwing things at you more frequently and more intensely, and then you continue suppressing this because you have to go to this party or meeting or whatever. So rather than take time out and really tune into what's going on, you will take, like a headache pill and you do it anyway or whatever, right? And just so we keep, people do that and they repress and they repress and they repress, and the symptoms will become louder and louder and louder. And then at some point, the function will stop. You fall off the cliff because your body goes, you know what? I've been trying to communicate this for however many years. You haven't listened. I'm going to shut you down so that you have no other option but to listen. And that's what happened to me. I'm saying that is exactly what happened to me. When I fell flat on my face, when I got diagnosed with chronic fatigue, there was nowhere to go and nowhere else to do because I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. It'd be like 2 hours and that's it. And that was done with my day. I mean, I couldn't do any more. So what I'm saying is it's a very toxic Western approach, right? That we have, the kind of, like really not being connected to the body, not paying attention.
It's very deeply
That's such a
ingrained.
big thing, to connecting the head to the body again. It's such a big thing. You cannot heal if you don't feel. You can't heal if you don't feel. End of story.
Mhm.
If you just live in your head, completely disconnected from what's going on in your body, it's not going to work. It's never going to work. And then people, when they come to therapy, sometimes they have to spend a long time reconnecting to the body. But it's absolutely critical, because if we were taught as children to listen to the messages that the body is sending all the time, then we wouldn't be having this epidemic of chronic illness, would we? But that's not how the Western world works, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's so deeply ingrained that a lot of holistic practitioners are following the same thing, just with different tools or mechanisms, and without, I don't even know if they realize that they're doing it. But it's still pretty narrow, or just replace some type of drug or medication with an herb and a supplement, but it's still kind of like chasing these little, I don't even know what, it's just like.
I love it that you said that. I've got such a big gripe with this. I honestly do. Exactly right. So here's what we've got. We've got Rockefeller medicine with all the drugs and toxic, basically drugs with side effects. And I am not saying they haven't got their place. They have their place. Okay. When you have an acute situation and you need a drug, you need a drug. Even sometimes when you're diagnosed with a condition and it may be a really bad autoimmune disease or something like that, you may need something pharmaceutical to stabilize you. Once you stabilize yourself, then you can figure out your root causes and you can figure out how to make yourself healthy again. So I am not anti-drug per se. I'm not. However, with what's going on with this constant brainwashing people that their body cannot do anything without drugs and vaccines. I mean, please, right? We've got that. So we've got that. That's the conventional approach. And they will keep their customers coming back for more because they will just push drugs on them that they don't even need, right? Let's face it. Most people don't need antidepressants. They really, really don't. And that's just one example. Never mind awful things like statins. What's that all about, right? So anyway, can go on forever about that. So we've got that world of conventional medicine completely clueless. They basically separate. If you see, they've got those different specialties. They've got neurologists, and then they've got gastroenterologists and all the ologists that never communicate with each other, right? It's like those are separate things. I mean, that's just crazy.
Smart people too. It's like, it blows your mind. Like,
I mean, blows your mind, right?
But that's what brainwashing is. Like, you can get intelligent people. It doesn't matter how smart you are. If you can only see within a certain lens, then it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And so that's an idiotic approach to health. It's just like, I just cannot believe that anybody does that, but they do. And that's the official, conventional medicine. I'm telling you, not for much longer, people are seeing how this doesn't work, right? So one day this will completely fall apart. Just mind my words, this will collapse, the system of medicine, because it just doesn't work. It doesn't work for chronic illness whatsoever, not in one bit. Never mind that they never consider mind and they never consider soul in any of that. There's no healing. Conventional medicine doesn't talk about healing. It talks about treating symptoms. So we've got that. But then we made a nice kind of like, at some point, this nice thing turned up called functional medicine, right? I mean, we've had natural medicine for a very long time. But then functional medicine turned up at some point, and they started talking about root cause medicine. But actually, most of the time, and I'm not saying every single functional medicine practitioner does that, but a lot of them do. They do exactly what you said. They do exactly what you said. They'll basically treat symptoms with supplements. So now we had drugs. So at least we now don't have the side effects of drugs, because if you treat a symptom with, I don't know, a bigger dose of vitamin B or whatever, that's actually a step in the right direction, but it's so far from where we need to go with this. Because another thing that is very funny, what I think is funny about functional medicine, is that they talk about root cause, but then they'll tell you that it's all about the gut. It's all about the gut. You know, you have to, if you get the gut right, that's the root cause and everything will be peachy. Well, we just talked about it. Is it true? It's only partially true. Definitely, obviously, it's important to get your gut and your microbiome in order, for sure, for sure. But here's a question that I keep asking over and over, and a lot of those people don't really want to listen to that, but I'm asking, what screwed up the gut in the first place? You were born with screwed up gut, or something actually screwed it up along the way? And most of the time, even though obviously we can talk intergenerational trauma, like I said, epigenetics and all of that, but actually what you find is that you had early exposure to stress, and we have studies that show that actually impacts the microbiome and the gut. And then you can't heal leaky gut if you don't heal your nervous system. You just can't. You could be going, honestly, to the nth degree trying to heal your leaky gut, and you will always have leaky gut if you haven't healed your nervous system. And healing your nervous system means healing your traumas, means healing your beliefs. It means healing the emotional toxicity, the chronic guilt, chronic shame, poor self-worth, blah, 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 right? See how that always sort of comes back to that. But obviously trauma, you know, I mentioned that there's PTSD type trauma and there's developmental trauma. There's also things like ancestral trauma. The stuff that's sitting in the field from, you know, God knows how many generations back. He was talking about that, you know, in relation to the gut. Nobody, right? So that's crazy. It's crazy. We need to bring it all together and not be so blinkered and just try and biohack everything, because it gets you some of the way. And I'm not saying that you can't use those hacks to just help yourself along. You can and you should. But don't think that that's going to give you the optimum levels of health, which personally, just not being sick is not good enough for me. I need to be healthy. When I was at my sickest, at a time I was into ballroom and Latin dancing, and I used to do a lot of competitions. And when I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue, and then just like that overnight, bang, I couldn't do it. But I was determined to go back to that. And I went back to competitive dancing. I went back to rock climbing. I went back to running. I went back to say, I just do whatever I want, really. In terms of physics, I'm not limited. I'm completely recovered. And a lot of people will tell you can never recover from chronic fatigue. That's complete nonsense. Complete nonsense. But if you just follow the conventional approach, then no, you probably will always have it, right? So that's why this more comprehensive, and yes, there will be different things, the mitochondria and cell danger response and this and that. But like I said, you need to heal it at the cell level, at the organ level, tissue level, and then at the mind level and the brain level, and at the energetic field level. You have to do all of that. Then you're going to get to the optimal level of health. And even if it sounds a bit overwhelming, there are some, you know, ways to ascertain what the biggest piece of the pie is, where you can make most gains most quickly. You can figure that out. And there are ways of doing it, right?
Yeah, that's what I talk about, the 80-20 rule, using that, and you know what's going to get the biggest results in the least amount of time, or what's like the smallest thing that you can do that gets the most results.
Yeah, exactly. And so then you make the where you can the biggest gains, and then you kind of fine tune, and you go after those other pieces. And you know, there's loads of things involved, including electromagnetic fields, all of that stuff, you know. So a lot of it is about removing the garbage out, both emotionally because you're not going to do beautiful emotional work if you still continue putting the garbage in. Yeah. So a lot of that, you need to take that out. But the same with the body. What's the point of taking supplements? You're still putting garbage in. Yeah. So we need to, the same energetically, if you're hanging out with people who are literally bombarding you with crap energy and you're not protecting yourself and you're welcoming it in, what's the point of then going, it's just, it's common sense.
Watching the news.
Yeah.
Watching the news every day. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That one will get you.
Yep. They're the masters of programming. Remember, nobody can program you better than the media and the politicians. Yeah. And if you don't program yourself, somebody else will do that for you. Please remember, it's absolutely 100% true.
Yeah, something's always going in, so you need to be in charge of what's going in, because something is. Beautiful. So lastly, so when it comes to healing this vagus nerve and switching, going from sympathetic parasympathetic, what are we talking about there when you're talking about throughout this conversation, any type of just anything that falls under the category of like trauma therapy, or anything that produces relaxation, like breathwork, meditation, what kind of, so someone who might listening and just like this resonates, like I need to, how can I start to calm my nervous system? What are we talking about there for them?
Yeah, absolutely, all of those things. However, I want to make one point, because when people go and look up vagus nerve stimulation techniques, loads of stuff will come up. Anything from deep breathing techniques, through meditation, through things like havening techniques, EFT, all sorts of psychotherapy techniques, blah, 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 all of the stuff at the mind level. Then there's going to be things like acupuncture and massage, sauna therapy, cold therapy, gargling, humming, singing, any type of sound therapy, all of those sort of things. And even physical approaches, like, supporting your microbiome will still help your vagus nerve. So there's going to be loads. But what I want to say, which is really, really important, probably the most important, is that when you activate your ventral vagus response, so that's your rest, digest, and detoxify and heal response, you know that because you feel that kind of, that's nice feeling, yeah? So that's how you feel that. Now, if there is something that people are saying, oh, this is really good for your vagus nerve, and then you go and do that, and you feel activated by it, you feel stressed by it, then clearly at this point in time, just because this works for everybody else, it's the same with food, yeah? Like I said before, garlic, garlic, garlic for everybody. Well, my husband is allergic to garlic, so it's not good for him, yeah? Same with this. If you are used to meditating, for instance, or you like sound therapy, sound healing, that sort of thing, maybe you even play an instrument, stuff like that, this obviously will work for you, and you will resonate with this, and resonance is everything. However, say somebody has got a lot of unresolved trauma and they come to meditate and they basically feel really worked up, really agitated, and they basically feel more stressed doing it than not doing it, then what that means is you're not activating your ventral vagus. Just because this is a good technique for activating vagus nerve, it's not right for you at this time, and you are not activating it, you're activating your fight or flight. So go towards things where there will be things like cold showers or sauna therapy. Those things work because this is a hormetic way of strengthening the vagus nerve. But that can be also helpful, the kind of those body-based things. Anything like massage, things like that just makes you feel relaxed. Anything that just makes you feel nice, safe, because you will not activate your vagus nerve unless you feel safe and unless your brain considers that. So you need to be the perceived sense of safety. Just like perceived stress and real stress are for your nervous system, it doesn't matter if it's real or not. If it's perceived, it's still stress, and it's gonna activate the fight or flight. Same with relaxation, needs to be perceived by you to be relaxing. That's very important. So I can give you all of those tools and tell you go and do them, but you may not be in the right place to do some of these things. And you may find that actually I'll do better with something else. And that if that's the case, you do that something else, because you obviously have a better resonance and it's going to work better for you. That's not to say that if somebody is activated negatively by meditation, they shouldn't explore why that is, because you always need to get to those root causes. That's I encourage that. I absolutely advocate that. But at this point in time, you may find that if you do a slow, deep breathing exercise, you're okay with it. But if you try and meditate and sit there and on, you may not be right. So you just need to pick what is better for you at this time. And then if something triggers you negatively, you need to then go and explore why that is.
Yeah, that's like with the breathing techniques, it's become super popular to do the hyperventilation style. And then so people will do that thinking that will help relax them, but then they're just like working themselves up when they'd be much better off with just, slow breathing and just really relaxed breathing. So yeah, that's a very good point. If I may comment on this, because that's an excellent point, because there are two ways, distinct, different ways of actually getting your vagus function improved. One of them is directly calming it down. So a deep, slow breathing will do that. The other is what I already alluded to, and that's hormesis. So when you do something that you dosing carefully the stress, and because you're dosing that stress carefully, whether it's heat, cold, or exercise,
exactly, or as you said, some of those breathings like Wim Hof breathing or breath of fire, something like that. These are stress breaths. So what they do is they don't actually indirectly, they work on the vagus nerve indirectly via adaptation. But because some people have a lot of unresolved trauma and they basically spend a lot of their time in fight or flight or freeze response, then if you try and give them that sort of breathing, that may be too much for them at this time. And they may do exactly as you said better with the slow, more relaxing type of breathing. So there's a big difference. Some of those techniques are acting directly on the vagus nerve, activating vagus nerve directly, and then other techniques basically activate your fight or flight. But because it's only brief and controlled, then you put yourself through that stress response, then you calm back down, and your body, because it was dosed carefully, your body will adapt, and then you'll be able to handle more and more and more and more. So that's, as we said, that's cold therapy, heat therapy, exercise, and those kind of advanced breathing techniques. So that's why. So people need to make a distinction, because not everybody is ready for the Wim Hof method. Let's face it, not everybody's ready for that at this time.
Beautiful. Well, I've been thinking about this cold river down there. I was thinking about going in today. I didn't have time this morning, and I just think about it again. That'd be real cold. That was very, I think a lot different than a cold shower. But yeah, anyway, can you share how people can find you, attend your workshops, work with you, all that stuff?
Yes. So the best way, I don't do a fake book or any of the other awful social media who just want to censor anything that is actually good for people and can help people. As I have discovered, I've been banned enough times for sharing, natural approaches.
Health.
Exactly. So I'm not big on them. So the best really way to get to me is from my website, which is dr-eva. So it's Dr. Eva, but it's dr-eva.com. And then all the information really is there. And I mean, if people have any questions, they can always email me, and they can do that through the website as well. I've got my big 12 module course coming up. This is going to launch very soon in the next few weeks. And that's basically, the course is about addressing psychoenergetic root causes of chronic illness. So all this stuff, we building neurological, emotional, and physical resilience, but we also we're going deep with trauma. It's the sort of course that you do work through it yourself, but I am on standby in case, you know, something big could be coming up and you need that additional support. I'm testing it right now, and I've got a bunch of people doing it right now as a beta test, and they're loving it. I'm getting really great feedback, and people are really accessing things at a deep level doing this. So it's great. I'm very pleased with that. So if anybody's interested, come and contact me and check it out.
That's awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, let me know when that's live too. Well, actually, I'll see it in your emails. Never mind. But yeah, thanks again for being here and sharing all your great wisdom. And it's just, yeah, so nice and refreshing to talk to people like yourself, and, you know, who share the same values and perspectives of health, which I believe is, you know, through experience, right? Like, it sounds like yours came through experience, mine came through experience, now not through books or what other people said. That helps affirm things and be like, oh yeah, you know, this happened and then I read that there. It makes a lot of sense, but it really came from doing and being and experiencing. And so that's what I think I was picking up from you. So thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope this was useful.
Definitely.